Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I know someone put in the Q&A that they couldn't hear me, so I just wasn't starting yet. So, all right. So welcome to tonight's seminar. My name is Patrick. I'm your host. I'm the VP for Counseling for HS2 Academy. So hopefully you can all hear me okay. So today's seminar is about exploring what are known as the public Ivy universities. These are the top public institutions across the United States. Okay. So I'm sure many of you are already familiar with the Ivy League schools. So just as a refresher, if some of you don't remember which those are, we're talking about schools that are primarily very highly competitive institutions, but private schools that are largely in the East Coast. So these are the most recent US News rankings. You'll have colleges like Princeton, Harvard, and Yale, of course, along with some other notable ones like UPenn and Columbia, of course, right? In addition to that, there are also some other outstanding schools across the country, some of which are known as the Little Ivies. These are largely like the top liberal arts colleges across America. These are not maybe as well known, okay, but are still also very, very solid educationally, right? They offer very outstanding programs. The main difference, of course, is that an Ivy League or compared to a big research Ivy League university, a liberal arts college simply won't have any grad school. They don't have grad school students there. Okay. Now, the topic for today's lecture, though, is the public Ivies, right? So the public Ivies, of course, there's not any formal designation calling them Ivy League schools as well. This is more of an informal categorization for the top public universities across the US. And so you'll see a lot of the familiar names on here. Of course, at the top of the list, we have two of the prominent UC campuses in California. But, along with this list, of course, you see a lot of the top public universities as well, many of which are probably familiar with you in the audience if you're looking at schools that are excellent for fields like business or engineering, right? So that's the topic for today. We're going to go do a deeper dive into some of these schools, find out what they're good at, find out some unique kind of quirky features about these schools and their history, right? So, what is a public Ivy university in a broad sense? Well, these are, of course, top public universities across the United States that have risen in prominence due to their roles as research institutions. So, this term public Ivy was coined by a man named Richard Mall, who was a former Yale admissions officer when he wrote a book in 1985 called, interestingly enough, The Public Ivies, right, which initially focused on 8 public universities. With academic reputations that rival the Ivies in some regard. Now, of course, the original 8 are very different from what I widely consider public Ivies now. So there's been an evolution of what is widely considered a public Ivy. So we'll be going over what I consider public Ivies based on basically a composite of various lists and, of course, our history in HS2 in terms of knowing which schools are most widely applied to and the top schools for our students. Okay. So while the list has changed over the last few decades, there are some consistencies over the years, most notably that these schools do have some selective acceptance rates, right? So maybe not quite as selective as the Ivy Leagues in terms of having like a sub 5% acceptance rate or something like that, but they're still very competitive nonetheless. They will offer excellent research opportunities and research facilities, right? And they have an elite reputation, especially for very popular majors such as business or engineering, which is kind of not a surprise because as public universities, their main job is to cater to their state population. And given that's the case, they do want to focus more on fields that do produce the most jobs. So it's not a coincidence that they do excel largely in fields like business or engineering, because that's where the jobs are these days, let's face it. Okay. And because of their role as larger public universities, one kind of feature that stands out too is that they have excellent alumni networks, right? Because they're bigger schools, so there are more students going there. And so consequently, when you graduate, there are more alums that you can network with, right? Okay, so the list, just as a refresher based on what we're looking at here, we're going to focus on 10 of them. Now, of course, there are going to be some debates. Some people might want to expand this to like 16 or even 20. I decided to pare it down to a more manageable 10, right? Because these are probably more common in various lists, right? So you're not going to go wrong going for the ones that do pop up in almost all the lists, okay? So let's, without further ado, let's kind of dive into, first of all, what the admissions process is like for these Ivy or these public Ivies compared to, let's say, for example, their more famous cousins, right? The actual private Ivy League schools, right? So first of all, in terms of acceptance rates, they are getting pretty low. So most notably here, like UCLA, you're looking at about a 9% acceptance rate. UC Berkeley is at about 11%. So this is probably about the same rates as the Ivy League schools had maybe about 10 or 15 years ago, right? So over time, these schools will actually be growing more and more competitive. Now, some of these schools have still not released their class of 2029 acceptance rates. Those should come a little bit later, right? So for now, at least, there's not much change, to be honest. I think for these schools, like the acceptance rates between last year and this year are more or less kind of very similar, right? And so as you can see here, the one with the highest acceptance rates are schools like UIUC in Illinois and University of Wisconsin-Madison, obviously in Wisconsin. All right, but don't be fooled by the relatively higher acceptance rates, but because these schools are very hard to get into for their top majors, right? So for fields like business or engineering, especially if you're an out-of-state student, the acceptance rates have gotten pretty low, right? So as you can see here, right, if you're looking at 42%, it's largely because they do have other majors, and they're also going to have a much higher acceptance rate for their state students, right? Their in-state students. So just keep that in mind. All right. So how do public universities evaluate students compared to many top private universities? So first of all, given the size of most of these flagship public universities, the admissions process tends to sort of be farmed out to various admissions readers who are usually part-time seasonal employees of the university who are hired to evaluate these applications with a more limited criteria that they're looking for, right? So sometimes the actual full-time admissions office, the staff will be used as tiebreakers if the admissions readers may have different reads on a certain student. Sometimes, they will just not even have them as part of the process, right? So if the admissions readers just, rate them differently, it is what it is in terms of the ranking and everything. So I know for like the UCs like Berkeley and UCLA, they will oftentimes have two admissions readers. And if there's a wide divergence in the ratings, only then will the admissions officers be used as tiebreakers. Otherwise, they have certain cutoffs predetermined based on the ratings that those readers provide. Okay. Now, unlike Ivy League universities and many other top private universities, many of these flagship public universities simply do not offer interviews, right? So it's something to keep in mind so that if you are applying to these schools, then if you want to be able to put a spotlight on your individual accomplishments, then things like the essays and your descriptions of your activities will definitely be a better place to start in terms of emphasizing those elements, okay? So many of these public Ivies also do not have recommendation letters, like the UC system for California. They don't accept recommendation letters, right? So some other public Ivies do, like Michigan, for example, UIUC and Georgia Tech do have provisions for recommendation letters, but they may limit things like outside or external recommendation letters, right? So just keep that in mind when you're applying to these schools, okay? Now, especially for popular majors like business or computer science, many of these public Ivies now use what's called a direct admissions policy, where if you didn't get in as a freshman into one of these popular majors, it's almost impossible. It's very, very difficult to change majors to those things. Like computer science, for example, schools like UIUC or Georgia Tech, if you didn't get into computer science as a freshman, it's become increasingly difficult to change majors to those popular fields, okay? So that should also be part of your strategy or part of your planning when considering applying to these schools, okay? All right, now, public universities will oftentimes admit students by specific major. In other words, the acceptance rates are more tied to the specific major, or in some cases to the specific school or college that you're applying for. So one example here is the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, widely known as UIUC. As you can see here, the acceptance rates will vary depending on which majors you're applying to. So of course, their most popular school is going to be their Granger College of Engineering, which also houses their computer science major. So across the board, you're looking at about 24% acceptance rate. Whereas if you are applying for fine or applied arts, it's closer to like 50%. So this is also another factor you want to consider when you're applying to the schools, because simply looking at the overall acceptance rate might give you a very deceptive impression of how easy or hard the school might be. Right. So you may want to do some research into the specific major so you have a better understanding of how hard the school might be in terms of the application process. Okay. All right. So another thing to keep in mind is that these schools are growing more and more, competitive and demanding, even with things like standardized testing requirements. So one of the key things that have now changed in the last 3 or 4 years is that some of these top public universities, much like their counterparts, the Ivies, and for private schools, are now increasingly requiring SAT and ACT again, right? So three of the schools on this list, UT Austin, University of Florida, and Georgia Tech now require either the SAT or the ACT. Most notably, though, UCLA and Berkeley, like the rest of the University of California system, has remained test blind, right? They do not evaluate your standardized test scores. They don't even allow you to send it to them as part of the application. So that's an interesting feature. A lot of these other top public universities, though, have not followed suit. They either remain test optional, right, which means you can submit an SAT or ACT score if you want to, or choose not to, right? And they will evaluate you based on what's available to them. It's not a penalty if you don't submit an SAT score or ACT score, okay? Now, of course, having said that, given how competitive these schools are, if you do have a high SAT or ACT score to the point where you're closer to what you see here with the 75th percentile, then of course you should probably go ahead and send it, okay? If your scores are maybe a little closer to the 25th percentile, which are like the bottom 25%, for the schools that are not required, like the test optional schools, maybe you can consider going test optional, right? Or consider scheduling another attempt at the SAT or ACT again, right? So just keep that in mind. So the bar is pretty high for many of these top schools, right? So just keep that in mind if you're thinking of applying to these schools. Okay, so some of these schools will also have some options for early admissions, right? So early action or early decision, right? So most notably, UCLA and Berkeley, the same way that they're test blind, they also decided they're not going to have any sort of like EA or ED, right? So yeah, so there's no EA or ED for that. Most of the other schools on this list do have EA. University of Michigan, though, has recently announced that they are going to add early decision to their range of options. So they'll have an early action option, an early decision option, and a regular decision option. For those of you who are not familiar, maybe you're a younger student who's looking into these things and you haven't really done a lot of research, early decision will typically give you the highest acceptance rate because you're also sort of making a deal with the university in some way. You're signing a contract that says that if you are accepted by the school, you are committed to going there, right? So oftentimes this is going to give you the biggest boost in terms of your chances. ED acceptance rates typically tend to be highest compared to their overall acceptance rates. In some cases, double or even triple what the overall acceptance rate would be. So a new feature here is that for the fall of 2026, not this coming fall, of course, but next fall, they're going to add an ED option, right? So this is definitely something that if you're thinking of Michigan as a school that you're interested in, you could consider EDing to the school if it's a school that really, really fits the profile of what you're looking for as your top school or your dream school, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and take a closer look at some of these universities. We will start with UCLA, right? So UCLA is the highest rank among these schools. It is now ranked number 15 by US News and World Report. Beyond that, there's some other programs at UCLA that are also excellent. It is number 16 for their undergraduate engineering program. They're also outstanding in economics, number 16 in computer science, so not too shabby. I think they're just a good all-around school. They don't really shine necessarily in any one particular thing, but they're just pretty solid for most majors, right? So pretty well-rounded school, right? So they're also good for social sciences like history, but they're also traditionally a very strong pre-med school as well, boasting pretty strong bio and chem programs. They have a top-tier medical school, so that like it's a good option. Plus, of course, it's in LA. So even if you don't necessarily get as high of a ranking for some of the majors, there are some added benefits of going to a school that's pretty much the second largest metro area in the United States. So if going to school in LA is appealing to you, and of course the weather is going to be nicer than maybe going to school in the East Coast year round, it's probably going to be a top choice for many students who are thinking of applying to California. Okay. Beyond that, here's some interesting features about UCLA. It was founded back in 1919, so it's a relative baby among this list. It's really the only major research institution that was founded in the 20th century, right? So it's one of the newer schools on this list, but yet it's also now the highest ranked school, right? And it is in large part because it's just simply a really popular school. I think in terms of the number of applications, it's over 150,000 applications to UCLA alone, making it probably, if you're basing it on the number of applications, it's probably the single most popular college in the world, okay? Now, in addition to being a strong school academically, it also boasts a long history of success in sports. It boasts an amazing 124 NCAA championships in various sports. I think the only school that beats that out is, I think Stanford has slightly more, right? So one of their key things is that they're really notable for their basketball dominance back in the 1960s and 70s. They won 10 championships in a span of 12 years, and they had a record 88 game win streak, which is just mind boggling, right? That's just a crazy win streak right there. Now, of course, the Bruins are locked in a bitter crosstown rivalry with the Trojans of USC, which is actually where I did my undergrad. But yes, while there is that rivalry, usually during the rivalry week, which is typically when both schools play football, I think there's a nice sort of friendly relationship amongst the students between both schools because many times, like a lot of students who went to school in LA will oftentimes have friends that go into either university. So when I was an undergrad at USC, I oftentimes would visit my friends at UCLA and vice versa. Okay. Now, it's not just a sports school. It's also really noted for its academics. In fact, it boasts 16 Nobel laureates, right, over the years. It's also really famous for its cinema and film program, right? So, of course, no surprise, right, given its proximity to Hollywood. So it's a school of theater, film, and television. It's consistently ranked in the top 5. Obviously, there are debates back and forth between USC, NYU, and UCLA in terms of who has the best film and cinema programs, right? So not surprisingly, a lot of its notable alumni include famous directors and actors, right? So Rob Reiner, Francis Ford Coppola, two really famous all-time directors, graduated from there. All-time sports great Jackie Robinson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar went to UCLA, and actors like Tim Robbins and Randall Park, right? So some of the younger people in the audience might know Randall Park because he's in like the Marvel universe and stuff, right? All right. Next is we have the University of California, Berkeley, right? So if you simply say University of California, most people assume that you're talking about Berkeley because it is the University of California. It is, in fact, the first of the UC campuses that was founded. So it's now ranked number 17 overall. So for many, many years, Berkeley was actually ranked higher than UCLA, but only in recent years, in the last 4 or 5 years, has UCLA surpassed it in the main US news rankings. However, I would say that for very specific programs, I would say Berkeley is still probably stronger than UCLA, especially in really popular fields like business and engineering. And no surprise here, you could see this, that it's number 2 for undergraduate business program. Its Haas School of Business is outstanding. It's also number 3 for undergraduate engineering. And if you happen to be interested in both, business and engineering, it has a really, really hard to get into program called MET, right? So its MET program at Berkeley requires you to be admitted to both their Haas School of Business and their College of Engineering. So it's incredibly hard to get into. I think the acceptance rate these days is something like 3 or 4%. Okay, it's also outstanding in a wide range of fields, number 2 in computer science. It's tied for number 5 in econ. Across the board, it's outstanding for fields like psychology and English and physics and bio and chemistry. So you can't really go wrong going to Berkeley, which is why, no surprise, a lot of students who go to California, even if they can't make it to an Ivy, they're very happy going to Berkeley because you're probably getting the same level academically as you would going to an Ivy League school, just based on these rankings, how strong it is for a lot of, especially for STEM fields, but minus the expensive tuition of having to go to a private East Coast school, right? So like in-state tuition, if you live in California, is going to be like under 20K, right? Just for the tuition alone, of course, right? So yeah, it makes it a bargain in higher education. So oftentimes the UCs are widely viewed as a tremendous value, especially if you are a California resident, okay? Some fun facts about Berkeley, right? So it was founded in 1868, a little after the Civil War, as the first campus in the University of California system. If you've ever visited Berkeley, it's famous for its a bell tower called the Campanile. So it's actually the third tallest of its kind in the world. So it's a really, really prominent landmark. Anywhere you are on the Berkeley campus, you could probably see it. Okay. Berkeley is also known for the as the birthplace of the free speech movement back in the 1960s, right? So especially around 1964, I think at the beginning of the Vietnam War, this is where you get like, of course, there were movements, similar movements across the country in terms of various campuses. But yeah, so this is where you get like the hippie movement and like the student protests. Like, there was a really famous student leader called, I think his name is Mario Savio, who was like one of the pioneers of this free speech movement in the United States. Okay, another cool feature of the campus is that they have a 34-acre botanical garden that has more than 10,000 different types of plants. So if you just like a peaceful place to kind of wander around on campus, that's a great spot. If you really were interested in botany, that's amazing. That would be a nice place for you to kind of like, look into some stuff. All right, some notable alumni. You have the other Steve. I would probably say the more instrumental Steve when it comes to the technology of Apple. So Steve Jobs was more noted for the marketing of Apple products, but Steve Wozniak was widely seen as kind of like the brains of the operation, I guess, when it comes to the actual technology, right? So it's also the home of famous actors like Gregory Peck and Chris Pine. And women's soccer great Alex Morgan also went to UC Berkeley. Okay. All right. Next, we move on to the University of Michigan. This is in Ann Arbor, which is kind of a suburb of Detroit, I guess, right? So beautiful campus, really close to the lake. So of course it gets really cold around the wintertime. It's ranked number 21 overall by US News. And much like Berkeley, it's outstanding for both business and engineering, right? So its Ross School of Business is number 4 for undergraduate business, but it also is in the top 5 for undergraduate engineering. So you really can't go wrong if you're looking at one of these popular fields because Michigan is just outstanding, right? It's a great school overall. Plus, it's also obviously really strong for other fields like computer science. It's one of the better schools for econ. And as you can see here in other fields like psychology, number 3, public health, number 2, pharmacy, number 2. So if you're interested in kind of like the health or like a pre-health major of some sort, Michigan would be an outstanding fit. I think this you really can't go wrong. And of course, based on just its natural sciences, bio and chem, if you wanted to get research opportunities, Michigan definitely is one of the best campuses that provides undergraduates, even as early as freshman year, the opportunity to conduct research on campus, right? So it's definitely a good choice if you do especially want to aspire to maybe doing grad school, because you will have so many different opportunities to do research on campus, much more so than even some of the Ivy League schools, right? Probably even most of the Ivy League schools, to be honest. Okay. All right. So Michigan, the University of Michigan was actually originally founded in Detroit in 1817, and it didn't move to its current location in Ann Arbor until about 20 years afterwards. Its original name is actually kind of funky, right? So, obviously in the 1800s, you still had people studying Latin and Greek. The original name of the school was the Catholicist Epistemiad. I don't even know. I mean, it's a good change. I'd say it's a good change, right? Because that would be hard if people can't even pronounce the name of the school. Okay. Now, Michigan, as you probably well know, is a very famous school for football, right? So the University of Michigan, um, very strong football program across the country. Now, its college football stadium, which is referred to as the Big House, is actually the largest of its kind in the United States. It can fit 107,000 people on there. It's even bigger than the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, right? That fits about 100,000, 105,000, right? So yeah, this is huge, right? So it goes to show that it's a big part of the culture of the school as well. So if you went to school at Michigan, going to the football games, hanging out with your fellow students, doing things like, just mingling and being part of that culture is a big part of what makes going to school to Michigan fun, right? So it's not just the academics. Now, Michigan is also first in many ways. It was one of the first major universities to admit women. It was also a pioneer of something called the seminar style of teaching in the United States, which is, of course, the more dominant form of like education for like graduate school. But they even pioneered it for some of their higher level or upper level undergraduate courses. Now, some notable alumni from University of Michigan include former U.S. President Gerald Ford, musicians such as Madonna and Iggy Pop, and Olympic swimmer Michael Phelps. That guy who won like tons and tons of swimming gold medals. Yes, that's him. Okay, next up, we move now to the South. We now are looking at the University of Virginia, right? Which is in Charlottesville, right? So UVA is still in the top 25 for overall rankings, right? It's just under that at number 24. It slipped a little bit in the last couple of years for its undergraduate business rankings, right? It's now down to number 12. But in prior years, I would say over the last decade or so, it's more consistently ranked probably like number 5 to number 7, right? So it's not an accurate reflection of how strong it actually is for business, right? Its MBA program is always consistently top 10. So if you had an interest in business, of course, UVA should be probably among the top schools on your list. And because it's a public EA, that you can probably apply to it in conjunction with like if you're thinking of going ED somewhere else. Okay. It's also got an amazing law school. It's widely considered a top 5 law school. And unsurprisingly, you see the skew here is a little more towards things like the social sciences, right? So its other fields of note here include other fields like history and English. I mean, it's not terrible at other fields like computer science, but it's not really its core strengths, right? So I would mainly look at UVA if you had an interest in things like business or econ, or maybe some other social sciences like political science and stuff, right? So that would be probably what you'd be looking at if you're thinking of University of Virginia as a school on your list. Okay, interestingly enough, the University of Virginia was founded by one of our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, back in 1819. Right. So it was originally designed by Thomas Jefferson as a way to, produce leaders in the public realm. Right. So it's still famous for its School of Commerce, right, which is definitely where you get your undergrad business program from. And I'll talk to you about that in a little bit here. But it also even has one of the 26 remaining original publishings or printings of the Declaration of Independence. No surprise, right? Because Thomas Jefferson founded the school. Okay. One of the prominent buildings on campus, the Rotunda, was actually modeled after a really famous landmark in Rome called the Pantheon. And you could see it here in this picture. Yeah, this one right here. That is the Rotunda that it's famous for, right? All right. So other things about University of Virginia. Its undergraduate business program is much like Berkeley's Haas program was before it's changed like a couple of years ago, where its business classes were mostly taught for junior and senior year. So you wouldn't necessarily get into UVA as a business major. You would first maybe go for econ or some related field, and then apply to and get into its business program at the McIntire School of Commerce for your junior and senior year. So prior to that, they just encourage you to take a broad range of classes, fulfill your general education requirements. Okay. Now, because this university is also very old, a notable feature of campus is that like whereas some schools will feature a very, very prominent Greek life and you'll have things like fraternities and sororities, a thing with the University of Virginia is that it does have some secret societies on campus, some of which date back to 1825. I mean, I guess it's more or less like many other sort of campus student organizations and student societies, but they'll have their own like secret traditions and like they don't really always publicize it. So you do need to like do a little bit of digging and really ask fellow students to find out what these quote unquote secret societies are. They're not all that secret, to be honest. In the day of the, in the day and age that we have now with the internet and everything, you could probably find most of the secret societies on campus. But I'm willing to bet there's still a few super secret societies at UVA that really try their hardest not to publicize any information about themselves. Okay, next, we're staying in the South here. Now we're moving on to the University of North Carolina. In many ways, it's kind of very similar to UVA, but it's also got a very, very strong track record specifically for like biology and biotech research. So as you can see here, it is, oops, sorry, kind of missed the ranking of that. It should not be number seven. That should be, I think it's number 25, if I'm not mistaken, right? So it is the number 6 best undergraduate program in the country, right? So its track record, it's very, it was viewed as a peer institution to University of Virginia. They're oftentimes rivals in terms of their business programs, right? So beyond that, you can see a very, very strong skew here towards things like healthcare and pre-health. So you can see it's number 2 for healthcare management, number 2 in public health. So if you wanted to go like, study biology or study pre-med or pre-health, University of North Carolina is an outstanding overall area to be in, right? One of the key things here is that it's actually one of the oldest public universities in the country. In fact, it was the first public university to award degrees in the United States back in 1789, right? So just a little after the founding of our country, okay? All right, so the Tar Heels, which is what they're known as, that's their mascot name or their school name, right? They're also really known for their athletic program as well. So they've won 51 NCAA championships. In fact, its basketball program, which is probably the sport that it's most competitive for, is also notable for some key figures such as the legendary coach Dean Smith, who coached UNC basketball for many, many decades. And of course, the GOAT himself, Michael Jordan, right? So the best basketball player of all time graduated from the University of North Carolina. Okay, beyond that, you also have UNC Chapel Hill is also part of an area of the country called the Research Triangle. So there is an area in between University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Duke University, and North Carolina State that is now a major, major hub for like biotech research firms, bio research, companies and medical research companies, right? So one of the benefits of going to school at a school like UNC is if you wanted to do research in fields like biotech or medical research or pharmaceutical research, this is really the place where you would want to go because it'll give you access to a lot of the top research firms in the country, okay? So it is also notable for producing what are called Rhodes Scholars, right? So there's 54 Rhodes Scholars. So Rhodes Scholars get to travel to schools like Oxford, right, in the UK, and do further graduate work over there. It's a very competitive program for US undergraduates. All right, so now we're still staying in the South here. We have the University of Texas at Austin, right? So, or just called UT, basically for short, right? So UT is the number 30th ranked university in U.S. News in the country. Much like its other, peer public Ivies, it also is outstanding for fields like business and engineering. But whereas like UVA recently and North Carolina are more focused more on business, UT is very similar to like Michigan or Berkeley in that it's very well-rounded and outstanding in both business and engineering and STEM fields as well, right? So it is number 6 for business, number 10 for engineering. It also has the number 7 computer science program in the country. So if you're interested in CS, UT is probably going to be among the schools that you'd be applying to. It's also very strong as a pre-med school, right? Not too bad for fields like pharmacy, not too bad for bio and chem. It's pretty well-rounded, I would say, overall. But yes, so if you really wanted to go for business or engineering, though, UT should probably be one of the top schools that you should consider. And because they have early action, it's definitely not a bad school to try to apply for. Now, I will warn you, however, though, if you do not live in the state of Texas, it's going to be a little bit harder because UT, much like a lot of other public universities in the state of Texas, does have like an admissions guarantee for a certain percentage of students. Like if you're in the top 5% in the rankings for any high school in the state of Texas, you're guaranteed admission to UT Austin. For the rest of the public university system in Texas, it's top 10%. Right. So that does mean that a lot of the slots are already taken up by these automatic admit students. So if you are applying for a more competitive program like business or engineering, that top 5 does not guarantee you admission. You're guaranteed a spot at UT Austin, but not necessarily for those majors that you want. Now, if you are an out-of-state student, the acceptance rate is kind of low. It's probably you're looking at about 8% these days, right? So it is a very competitive school if you are not in the state of Texas. So just be aware of that, okay? So some other fun facts about the university, right? It was founded in 1883 with just a single building, right? Housing 8 professors and 221 students. But of course, it's grown since then, right? So today, UT is a research powerhouse responsible for numerous patents and inventions. It's also known for athletics, much like a lot of these top universities that we're talking about, having produced 60 NCAA championships and over 150 Olympic medalists, right? So it's definitely, a very fertile kind of like ground for producing Olympians for the US. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, it also houses one of the few existing copies of the Gutenberg Bible, right, with the original Gutenberg printing press back in like the 1600s or something, right? Some key alumni include NBA star Kevin Durant, legendary journalist Walter Cronkite, and famous actor Matthew McConaughey, right? So just to name a few, right? So Matthew McConaughey is probably as Texas as it gets with his famous Texas accent, right? He grew up not too far from Austin as well. All right, now we move on to the University of Florida, right? So if you wanted to go to nice sunny weather for most of the year, Florida could be part of your list, okay? Now, I will say though that if your picture of what Florida looks like is more like Miami and the beaches, you might be in for a little bit of a surprise because Gainesville is more on the western coast of Florida. So it's a little bit swampier. You may not have as nice a beach. So there is a University of Miami if you really wanted to go hang out at the beach, but University of Florida is the stronger academic institution, in my opinion, right? So it's tied as number 30th with UT Austin. It's not too bad for business or engineering, 23rd for business, number 35 for engineering, but it also excels in fields like pharmacy, is actually number 6 for education if you wanted to go into teaching down the line. It's an outstanding school. Okay. So some key facts about University of Florida. The school has been in existence since 1853, but it only moved to its current location in Gainesville in 1906. Interesting fun fact about the university: if you've ever had a Gatorade, right, as like an energy drink, Gatorade was actually invented at University of Florida. It was invented by, I guess, researchers at the university because they wanted to find a way to more properly hydrate University of Florida athletes, right? And so now it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere, right? If you watch a sporting event, people will be, athletes on the sidelines will be drinking Gatorade. People who win championships, they do that famous Gatorade, bath where they dump Gatorade on their coach or whatever, right? So yeah, and it's all founded here. So if you really wanted a big sports scene, Florida is definitely an outstanding school for both like football and basketball, right? University of Florida has the third largest student population of any public university in the United States. So if you wanted to go to a big university, meet a lot of people, Florida is a good place to go to. An interesting fact that I discovered when I was doing research on the school is that it's also home to one of the largest set of bat houses, not bath houses. I made the mistake when I was reading that at first, but it's bat houses, right? Interestingly enough, and there's over 500,000 bats that find their home at the University of Florida campus. Now, of course, they do keep them there a little bit more secluded. Don't worry about it. If you're scared of bats, they don't fly around campus on a regular basis, right? But they do so because, part of the university's mission is to maintain a lot of the wildlife and a lot of the native animals in the area. And of course, a lot of bats live in that area of Florida, right? So they wanted to keep them away from wandering around. So they have like specific homes for them at the University of Florida's campus. All right. Next we move to Georgia Institute of Technology, more widely known as Georgia Tech, right? So Georgia Tech ranked number. No, I think that's probably a mistake too. I don't think I updated that one. So number 18 overall for undergraduate business programs. I think they're number 33 overall ranking. My bad. Okay, but they're actually in the top 5 for undergraduate engineering, right? So it's something they're really known for in terms of their overall rankings. Now they're also excellent for other fields like computer science, number 21 in physics, and number 20 in chemistry, right? So in addition, they're actually not too bad for other fields like biology and mathematics. One of their most notable fields that they're really strong at is for bioengineering or biomedical engineering. In fact, they're ranked number 2 just for that specific subset of engineering, right? So if you're interested in becoming a bioengineer, that's probably one of the best places to go to, okay? So overall, Georgia Tech was actually founded in 1885. It started with just a couple of buildings, but because of various land grants and because the university or the state of Georgia started to expand, and there was a big need for like technology, and originally it was like an agricultural school, but then became more focused on like technology. And so now it has a big sprawling campus of over 400 acres, right? So, of course, because it is in Georgia, it's in the Deep South, it's actually an anomaly among universities in the Deep South because it was one of the first to voluntarily admit African American students without the Supreme Court having to rule and having the court or local courts, have a court order to, bar segregation or prevent segregation. Okay. An interesting thing on campus, if you ever were to visit, there is actually a steam whistle on campus. Interestingly enough, I've heard it before, that blows on campus about 5 minutes before the hour on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays to signal the end of class. I have no idea why just Monday, Wednesday, Friday, though, not Tuesday, Thursdays. If you are also interested in Emory University, which is a private university, there is a dual degree engineering program because Emory does not have engineering majors. So students from Emory who also want to study engineering at the same time will pursue a dual degree program with Georgia Tech. Okay. And Georgia Tech, compared to like schools like Caltech or MIT as a technology school, is the only public technology school that's consistently ranked in the top 10 public universities in the US. Okay. So it is a public university, but in many ways, it is a rival to schools like Caltech and MIT, especially for certain fields in engineering. Like I said, like biomedical engineering, it's going to be outstanding and very much on par with those top schools. Okay. All right. So next we move on to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So we had a streak there of about like 5 universities in a row that were in the South. Now we move up to the Midwest, right? So closer to the Chicago area. So University of Illinois ranked 33 overall by US News. It has the number 14th best undergrad business program, which is kind of interesting and kind of a surprise to some students because UIUC is widely known as like one of the top engineering and CS programs in the country. So in some ways, the fact that it's also a top 15 undergrad business program, it kind of flies a little bit under the radar, to be honest, right? But if you wanted to go for STEM, especially if you wanted to go for like electrical or computer engineering or computer science, there's not a lot of better schools than UIUC, which is why it's a very popular choice. A lot of students who are thinking of engineering will oftentimes also apply to UIUC in addition to applying to other schools like Carnegie Mellon or Caltech or MIT, right? So UIUC is still among the top schools for engineering specifically, especially if you want to go for computer engineering, okay? But it's also outstanding for a lot of other fields too, chemistry, physics, math, so it's a very strong school overall for STEM, but it's also a very highly underrated school for fields like business, English or psychology. Okay, just to keep that in mind. Okay, so overall, UIUC was founded in 1867, just a little after the Civil War. And it was one of the first public land grant institutions after Abraham Lincoln signed something called the Morrill Act, which basically sectioned off certain grants of land throughout the United States, specifically to be created for and used for things like higher education. Okay, now, of course, because of this affiliation with Abraham Lincoln, there's actually a famous statue of Abraham Lincoln on the campus of UIUC. And a tradition on campus is that students will often rub the nose of Abe for good luck right before their exams. All right, so if you end up going to UIUC, you'll see that the statue of Abraham Lincoln has a little bit more kind of like polish on the nose. It kind of looks a little bit weird. It's similar to the John Harvard statue at Harvard, where people rub the foot of John Harvard for good luck. It's a kind of a similar tradition in some other universities. So that's kind of the analogy to that, or a similarity there, okay? If you love books, UIUC will have one of the largest library collections, not just in the US, but in the world, as their library system has over 24 million items, right? So that's kind of an interesting tidbit about the school. Okay, so another fun fact about the university is that the tradition of homecoming, I don't know if this is 100% true, but I've seen a couple of websites that have this. It's rumored to have been started at the University of Illinois back in the day, okay? The campus is also one of the biggest in the country with over 6,000 acres. That's huge, right? This is one of the hugest campuses. So if you don't like walking around campus so much, this is probably not the best campus for you. But in fairness, most of the campus life is centered around like the main parts of campus. There is a campus center where most of the classes are going on. Okay, so a lot of the buildings on campus are probably dedicated to other things too, like, they do have, because of its location, a very strong agricultural program. There's also a lot of that 6,000 acres dedicated toward things like preserving wildlife and everything. So it's not just 6,000 acres of all just buildings across the campus, right? It is pretty centralized. There is a main hub as well. Now, speaking of hubs, it's also a hub of innovation. Some of the core discoveries in the last several decades have been created at the University of Illinois, right? So things like transistors, earlier forms of superconductors, and even things like plasma panels, right? So one of the precursors to a lot of the flat screen TVs and computer screens that we see now were developed there at UIUC. Okay. All right. And the last of our list, we have the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So not too far away, I guess, from UIUC, but further up north. It's further up north than Chicago. So to be honest, it gets really, really cold over here during the winters, especially because of the wind chill coming from the lakes, from Lake Michigan, right? So if you don't like the cold, maybe you want to rethink going to the school. So University of Wisconsin, yeah, I need to update these. So this was actually ranked 39 overall by US News. It is still outstanding for business and engineering. It's number 18 for undergrad business. It is number 13 for undergraduate engineering. It is also, much like a lot of its peers as public Ivies, outstanding for fields like computer science. For STEM fields in general, it's really solid. Like if you want to be pre-med, bio and chem programs are both top 20. It also has a tier 1 medical school, right? So if you're thinking of going pre-health, pre-med, it's an outstanding school. If you're going for business, not too bad, right? In the top 20. And it's also, of course, an outstanding school for those engineering or CS types, okay? Some tidbits about the university. It was founded way back in 1848 and is now actually one of the largest public universities, or just largest universities across the country, with over 52,000 students. So it's kind of easy to get lost in the crowd there, right? But if you like that relative anonymity, you don't like the fact that everybody knows you, and if you're like averse to going to like a small liberal arts college, then University of Wisconsin might actually be a good fit for you if you prefer the larger campuses and be able to meet people across the board, right? So big can be as helpful as well, especially if you're thinking of business, because the alumni network will be huge, especially if you might want to consider settling down in the Midwest, right? Around like the Wisconsin area or the Chicago area, the network is going to be immense, right? You're going to be able to get a lot of connections there. Okay, so its especially impressive list of alumni also boasts about 41 Pulitzer Prize winners. So if you are interested in journalism or becoming a writer, this is probably one of the best schools for you, okay? Now, if you like having a lot of things going on at campus at all times, you may enjoy the fact that it also has a very vibrant student community with about 200 or so free events going on at campus at all times during the year, right? And if you love ice cream, now, if you think this is kind of a weird thing, it's in Wisconsin, right? So they do a lot of dairy products, right? So you'll love to know that the university has been making its own ice cream on campus for its students and staff since 1951. So if you love various flavors of ice cream and stuff, the dining halls on, Wisconsin's campus are going to have some really amazing, like very fresh ice cream. So just FYI, right? If that's your thing, University of Wisconsin should probably be on your list. Okay. Now, largely to just cap things off or just to kind of summarize everything, what are the benefits then of attending one of these public Ivies, right? So for one, I would say one of the benefits here is enhanced job prospects. If you want to get a job right out of undergrad, one of the best things you can possibly do is go to one of these big public, flagship universities, because not only will you have a bigger network, right? There are a lot more students over there. There is also going to be tremendous resources that you can have there in terms of, career services support, job placement, right? So these schools excel at that because, like I said, part of their missions as public flagship universities are to provide jobs for their state students, but also for their out-of-state students who attend there as well, right? Now, if your long-term goals include graduate school or professional school, you'll be happy to know that these schools excel at research, right? So it's going to be very easy for you to get like undergraduate research opportunities at these schools. So I think that's definitely another plus factor if you're thinking of one of these public Ivies. And then lastly, the return on investment. If you're thinking, is it a good value? I would like to say that, yeah, it's a pretty good value in the sense that even if you're going from out of state, the tuition is still going to be significantly cheaper. right? For instance, if you're comparing this to a public university or private university, like an Ivy would probably charge you anywhere from $60,000 to $70,000 just on tuition alone, right? Much like a lot of private universities. Include maybe another 20,000 in terms of room and board, then you're easily getting close to like 80, 90K. Probably for the more expensive areas like in New York, you're probably looking at closer to $100,000 per year for your education. Whereas even if you're an out-of-state student, if you were to go to a UCLA or Berkeley, they charge about like $45,000, right? So it's a little bit lower, right? So schools like UIUC, you're probably looking at a little less, maybe like $42,000. Michigan would be a little bit more expensive at 50K or so for an out-of-state tuition, right? But still pretty good, right? Now, of course, it's nowhere near as cheap as if you're going to an in-state school. Like if you're, in California, you go to UC, it's probably going to be less than 20K, right? Much like a lot of these other schools, like UT Austin, it's going to be like 14K if you live in Texas, right? So it's certainly something to consider. But if the major that you're going for is happens to be like one of these schools are good at it, then you should definitely consider them as part of your list, right? So like I said, if you're thinking of going for engineering, oftentimes you'd be smart to go ahead and have schools like Michigan or Berkeley or UIUC on your list because these are some of the best schools for those majors, right? So definitely something to keep a lookout for and definitely something where you do want to take advantage of the resources that these schools offer, okay? Now, before we open it up for Q&A, I do want to talk to you about HS2 a little bit and how we can help you stand out. So HS2 has had a long track record for helping students get into some of the best colleges across the country. We've been doing this now since 2002. And over the last slightly over a decade or so, we've had some amazing results with like several dozen students getting into all these top universities, right? So like we've had students, like several dozen students get into schools like Harvard and Stanford. But even among like flagship, like flagship universities, like these public Ivies, like Berkeley, we've already had over 1,000 students over the years. UCLA close to 1,000 and about 900, right? So yeah, so we actually have a very, very long track record of getting our students into these top universities, including, of course, many of these public Ivy universities. Okay. Now, if you do live in Northern California or are planning to be there at the end of this month, I will be giving a seminar in person with my friend Stephen, right, who is a financial planner. So we're going to do a combo seminar. I'll largely talk about the admissions process, giving you a little bit more advice in terms of the upcoming application cycle. So if you do live in Northern California, I do highly invite you to attend. It's going to be held in Redwood City. You can scan the QR code you see here. Right. And you will also benefit from Stephen's wisdom in terms of things like financial planning for colleges, right? So definitely pick his brain about things like, like the FAFSA or scholarships or saving for college. He is an absolute expert in this. So I do highly advise you to consider, attending that seminar in person if you will be in the area anyway on the 26th. Okay. All right. So we also will be simulcasting this through Zoom, right? So we'll have like a camera. So if you can't be there in person, you can also join. You can do the registration here, and we'll be, giving out the Zoom link for that as well. Okay. All right. So with that, I'd like to open it up for Q&A. All right. So please go ahead and type in your questions, and I'll try to get to it in the order that I see them over here.